US President Donald Trump has slapped sanctions against the International Criminal Court for what he called are illegitimate and baseless actions against Israel and United States. Trump signed the executive order during Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to Washington. The sanctions place financial and visa restrictions on individuals and their families who assist the ICC in investigations of American citizens or its allies, including Israel. The repercussions of these sanctions mean potential freezing of property and assets as well as barring entry into United States. While Israel has welcomed the move, The Hague, where ICC is headquartered, has condemned the sanctions and said that it regrets the order. In the past few months, remember, ICC judges have indicted Netanyahu, his former defense minister Yoav Gallant, and Hamas's Mohammad Deif on reasonable grounds that they had a criminal responsibility for alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity. In recent years, the ICC has also issued arrest warrants against Russian President Vladimir Putin, Taliban leaders for persecuting Afghan girls and women, and Myanmar's military leader for crimes against the Rohingya Muslims. Even though US as well as Israel are not members of the ICC, this isn't the first time that Donald Trump has sanctioned ICC. In his previous tenure too, Donald Trump had imposed financial and travel constraints on the ICC officials who were probing whether American forces committed war crimes in Afghanistan. So how does this impact the ICC, the ongoing operations of the International Criminal Court, and what kind of relationship do the US and ICC share? Let's quickly decode this for you. On the broadcast, I'm joined by Mr. Richard Painter. He is the former chief White House ethics lawyer for President George W. Bush, as well as a law professor at the University of Minnesota. Mr. Painter, good evening. Namaskar. Thank you very much for speaking with us on Global Mirror. My first question to you, Mr. Painter, what do you make of Donald Trump imposing sanctions once again on the ICC?
On the ICC is going to be a constructive move. What we need to do is work with the United Nations to reform the ICC. We need an international criminal court, and the United States should be a party to the International Criminal Court. But we can't have a rogue ICC that does such things as accuse the Prime Minister of Israel of war crimes, when what he has done is defend Israel against an act of aggression, against a terrorist attack by Hamas, where over 200 hostages were taken, 1,200 civilians murdered simply for being Jewish, living in Israel. And Israel simply defending itself. We can discuss whether the means used were minimize civilian casualties as much as they should have. I think that conversation needs to be ongoing. We need to have a ceasefire and a two-state solution with Hamas ostracized permanently from any Palestinian state. Hamas is a terrorist organization, and the International Criminal Court has not recognized this. We have the spread of anti-Semitism across America, including in our universities, leading to civil rights complaints being brought against American universities because Jewish students are not feeling safe. But this is a very, very difficult environment. But it is not helpful to bring sanctions against the ICC. We need to fix the ICC and have the United States be a party to a reformed ICC that really enforces international law and goes after real war crimes, not make-believe war crimes and the false accusations brought against Israel in this case.
Mr. Painter, would the United States still call the ICC as a rogue court if, it is indicting Vladimir Putin for war crimes? Would the United States still have that stance against the ICC?
Well, I don't know that indicting Vladimir Putin is going to be an answer to the invasion of Ukraine. The invasion of Ukraine is clearly illegal, and war crimes have been committed. That's quite clear. But what we need to do is reach a ceasefire there also between Russia and Ukraine. Russia does need to withdraw its troops, and there needs to be pressure brought on Russia, but using the ICC to try to resolve that is not going to go anywhere. So we really need to think about what the role is, the proper role of the International Criminal Court, and using the International Criminal Court as a lever to try to force one side or the other to concede in an armed conflict, I think is a very, very bad idea. So Russia is clearly in violation of international law. They should leave Ukraine, but there needs to be a discussion between the world leaders to try and reach that result without the involvement of the ICC. I just don't think they're helping right now.
You talk about the reformation of the ICC, Mr. Painter. What, according to you, would mean reform in the ICC? What, according to you, would lead to changes in the ICC?
But we need judges appointed to the ICC that have the approval of the members of the Security Council. And that certainly includes the United States if we were to become a party to the Rome Treaty. And we need judges there who are going to focus on real war crimes that have been committed and other crimes that need to be prosecuted by the court against world leaders if they commit those crimes. But once again, using the International Criminal Court as a lever to try to extract a settlement, whether from Russia or from Israel or any other country, I think is completely unacceptable. It's not going to work. Israel, I think, is fully in compliance with international law, whereas Russia is not. But the International Criminal Court is not going to solve that problem. We need to have peace negotiations. We need ceasefires in these conflicts. We need to stop the killing. And I don't think the International Criminal Court judges are going to be able to do anything about that. And indeed, right now, I think they're making a lot of these problems worse.
You know, I also want to understand from you, Mr. Painter, the kind of relationship that the United States of America and the International Criminal Court has shared since the past several years. It's not been a very one-sided relationship. It's always been on and off. Many say that there has been a lot of convenience on the side of America when it comes to ICC and its orders. For instance, during the time of George W. Bush, there was the ICC decision of investigating the allegations of atrocities in Sudan, in the Darfur region, and that was supported. But there were other things that were not supported. Critics of George W. Bush say he should have been indicted for war crimes and invading Iraq as well. That did not happen. Later on, with the Obama administration, the same thing happened. There was support for investigation into Libya and Muammar Gaddafi and the war crimes allegedly that he committed. But the other decisions by the ICC were not supported. So there is a lot of convenience, critics say, that comes on the part of America.
There's no evidence whatsoever that George W. Bush committed a war crime in invading Iraq. We could have a discussion about whether that was a good decision to invade Iraq and the consequences of that decision, and also where we would be today if Saddam Hussein, who himself did commit war crimes, who used poison gas against Shiites and other minorities, if he were still in power, that would be a good thing, whether we'd be better off or worse off. And we can have those discussions. Many Americans think we should not have gone into Iraq, even though Saddam Hussein was a war criminal. But George W. Bush did not commit war crimes. And I think for the ICC or anybody to be saying that is exactly why the United States does not want to participate. Now, there were serious crimes during the war, during the Bush administration that I spoke out about, the interrogation, the torture of detainees in Guantanamo Bay. But those should have been prosecuted in the United States under United States law. The torture program was illegal, violated United States criminal statutes. And I've spoken out against a lot of that. But once again, for the ICC or people to be running around saying the ICC ought to indict George W. Bush, that's exactly the type of rhetoric that has led the United States to want to have nothing to do with it.
With these sanctions, Mr. Painter, a lot of people feel that it sets a wrong precedent for other countries, for members, for non-members of the ICC. They will follow suit as well. And therefore, where will there be then a global law body which can govern, the kind of challenges that the world faces today, and what how will we then go about and move forward as far as the legal consequences of people's and leaders' actions are concerned?
Well, first of all, I think the International Court of Justice, which the United States does participate in, it can be a useful instrument for resolving some of these problems. But once again, I believe the International Court of Justice has taken a lopsided approach to the conflict in the Middle East and its posture toward Israel. But still, the International Court of Justice is focusing on what is a violation, what is not of international law. They may be right, they may be wrong. I think they're wrong in some of their findings with respect to Israel, but that's a useful conversation to have. And we need to, as I say, once again, we are not going to solve these conflicts with judges and courts. We're going to solve these conflicts with peace negotiations. We need a ceasefire in the Middle East. We need a two-state solution and a Palestinian state that recognizes Israel's right to exist within its borders. And we also need a resolution of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And the idea that a bunch of judges are going to make those problems better and avoid more killing, particularly the International Criminal Court, people are imagining a world that simply doesn't exist.
Are you then saying, Mr. Painter, are you perhaps negating the complete idea of the ICC and saying that only peaceful negotiations and mediators between the conflicting parties can solve conflicts like these, like the Israel-Hamas war or the Russia-Ukraine war?
I would like to see one example where the International Criminal Court has stopped killing, has stopped a war. I don't see it. Now, after a war is concluded, if there's evidence of war crimes and the parties can agree that war crimes were committed by certain individuals and they need to be brought to trial before an international criminal court, I can see doing that as we did in Nuremberg after World War II, where war criminals were convicted, and in Japan after World War II. But conflicts need to be resolved. And the best way to resolve conflicts is peace negotiations, rather than each side digging in and saying, we're absolutely morally right and no one else is, and we're just going to keep fighting. And meanwhile, innocent civilians are dying. And that's what happens in war. Civilians are killed, a lot of civilians. And our moral obligation is to do everything we can to end warfare, to end the violence around the world. And I just simply do not see the International Criminal Court doing anything in these conflicts that has helped do that, accomplish that objective. Once again, after the warfare is concluded, when we have peace, yes, sometimes there is a role for criminal prosecution.
All right. All right. We'll leave it there. Mr. Richard Painter, thank you very much for joining us on Global Mirror and sharing your perspective on these latest sanctions that have been imposed against the ICC and its officials by the US President Donald Trump. Thank you very much, Mr. Painter.
Thank you very much.
All right, moving on to our second conversation on Global Mirror, ladies and gentlemen. The violent crisis unfolding in Congo is a decades-long conflict, largely between two ethnicities. But with foreign powers making inroads into the African continent, the situation has only worsened. In the past few weeks, more than 100 women have been raped in Goma. UN peacekeepers have been killed, and embassies of France and other countries have been vandalized. The M23 rebel group, believed to be backed by Rwanda, has announced ceasefire, but fears of an escalation still remain. The March 23 movement, or M23 rebels, took over Goma, which is the biggest city in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, in what many call a violent invasion of territory. Today on Global Mirror, we will tell you about the history of this crisis. And to talk more about this, I'm joined by Dr. Kenneth Ombongi. He's a historian and academician from Nairobi. Dr. Kenneth, good evening and namaskar. Thank you very much for joining us on Global Mirror. My first question to you, how do you see this entire unfortunate crisis that has been unfolding in Congo?
Well, As you correctly put it, this is a very unfortunate situation we're having, but it's hardly accidental. This is something that has a long-drawn history of conflicts in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is really caused by a combination, very complex combination of numerous factors and actors that have kept changing over the years until the situation that we have now. All these really, when you look through history from the last years of the 19th century, when this kind of started, it's really a combination of, ethnic, grievances, a situation of resource conflict, proxy wars, and then weak governance structures that have combined over the years to lead to the kind of situation that we are now, which is a serious humanitarian crisis. That is generally and very panoramically the way one can see this.
I also want to understand more from you, Dr. Kenneth, about the ethnic tensions that are going on in the region and what's the history behind it, because that is where it originated. It is a decades-long conflict that is still underway, and Tutsis are a group that are talked about often in this entire conflict.
Yeah, well, the origins of the ethnic conflicts in the Democratic Republic of Congo has its roots in colonial Congo. Congo was a colony of the Belgians, first acquired by King Leopold II of Belgium as a personal property in 1885. And he kind of, governed it and managed it as a personal property until 1908, when he handed it over to the Belgian government. Now, what the Belgian government did is literally to provide the Congolese ethnic communities and give them new identities that divided them among themselves. Basically, the typical colonial instrument of divide and rule. Unity, and the historians, we appreciate this, has never been a strongest factor that supports imperial designs. Colonialists divide the local people so that they are able to, one, alienate them from their cultures, alienate them from their land and the general resources, so that they can be able to dominate them and then control them. In the course of that, southern communities were privileged more than others. They had access to the colonial goodies than others. So what happened is the communities of the western parts of Congo, as opposed to the ones of the eastern part, where the conflict is now, particularly in the region called the Kivu province, were underprivileged, and the eastern parts, particularly the Tutsis, were actually favored by colonialism to some extent.
And therefore, would you say that, the West is using Rwanda and is part of a larger plan of the West to extract Congolese wealth, which also includes a lot of minerals, precious metals?
As I said earlier, this crisis is caused by intersections of a number of factors. The international community dimension is actually one of the geo-economic and geopolitical factor that plays in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Congo is a very rich country. In fact, in terms of natural resources, Congo is regarded to be the richest country in Africa, but it is a paradox of a rich country that is poor. And part of the reason is because of the misgovernance, which is a product mainly of intervention, not just of the Westerners, as we always believe, but also countries in the region. They have a lot of interests in the resources in Congo. So it is to their advantage. It is to the advantage of the geo-economic interests of not just the Western powers, but also countries in the region to have chaos in Congo so that they can get the minerals very easy through the numerous militia groups that are operating in this region. And over the years, a number of militia groups have operated in the region. It started with the militia group called Mai Mai, which was organized by the Congolese government, particularly during President Mobutu Sese Seko's time, to fight the Tutsis in the eastern parts of Congo. Now, the Mai Mai didn't do very well, and later on, they encouraged the Hutus who were running away after the genocide in Rwanda and took refuge in the eastern parts of Congo. They were supported by the government in Kinshasa to actually destabilize the Tutsis in the eastern parts of Congo using the Tutsi-Hutu differences that came from Rwanda. So as you correctly say, the interests of international powers, including the powers within the region, Uganda, Kenya, South Africa, they are all involved to get some slice of the Congolese melony, as it were. This is part of the situation that has exacerbated conflicts and created instability in a country that is very rich, but over the years has become the basket case of misgovernance.
Interesting, Dr. Mbongi, that you say this, that, the emergence and the increasing role of foreign powers in this region is worsening the situation and the crisis there. But I also want to understand from you the role of China, which is talked about in the African continent a lot, and that role has been increasing, isn't it?
Well, you see, China is one of the growing powers in the world today, very well in competition with the West and America generally, and its influence in Africa generally, whether you're talking about Kenya, you're talking about Nigeria, you're talking about Zambia, Zimbabwe. I was in Chad recently, and I saw the same thing. The role and influence of China is increasing. The same case applies to Congo. The Chinese, in their traditional way, they go in for economic diplomacy as opposed to interventions in politics and governance. So they are the silent players in many situations in the continent of Africa. There's no doubt about that.
And is this Chinese economic diplomacy welcome there by the locals?
It's really a divided opinion. Congo is a thoroughly divided country. Different groups and different interests have different relations with foreign powers. For a long time, President Mobutu Sese Seko was supported by America and the West generally to hold very strongly into Congo. And when he fell out of favor and was toppled in, I think, 1996 by President Kabila with the support of Rwanda and Uganda, there were interests around that, including Westerners who supported Kabila and others went against him. There are interests that support different militia groups. So it really depends on which group you are talking about. But I'm sure there are groups in Congo that support China, others supporting the Americans, the British, the French, and the Belgians all who are interested really in economic exploitation of this rich country in the continent of Africa.
My last question to you, Dr. Kenneth, these last few weeks in Congo have been extremely tragic and unfortunate. There's been bloodshed. There's been more than 100 women who've been raped, some of them burnt alive as well. With the kind of geopolitical situation that still prevails around the world, how do you see this moving forward? Clearly, no resolution or no short-term resolution can be seen right now.
Oh, well, I foresee a very interesting situation ahead of us. I don't think things are going to get better anytime soon. Different groups have gone into Congo. Recently, we had a group of soldiers from the East African community led by Kenya, which stayed in Congo for some time, and then they left. We have now a group of the South African Development Corporation called SADC, led by South Africa, which also is not very effective in trying to create some level of stability. So what I foresee, unless something is very drastically done, is a situation that is going to worsen, a humanitarian crisis that is already showing signs of serious mistreatment of women, children, and many other vulnerable groups in this region. So what the situation calls for now, I believe very strongly, is actually the intervention of the international community generally to be able to address certain specific issues which can lead to some semblance of peace and stability. The M23, which is the group that is leading this, is actually a group of Tutsi soldiers who are purportedly fighting to protect their interests as Congolese Tutsis against what the government in Kinshasa thinks. The situation is getting worse because there is very clear indications that they are supported by Rwanda, because Rwanda is worried about its security, because there is a belief that the government in Kinshasa is actually supporting the rebels who are working against the government of Rwanda. So it's a tit for that kind of situation. And as Gandhi said one time, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. And that's what we are seeing in Congo at the moment, with all these proxy wars, ethnic grievances, and also a very weak state.
But do you see any hope from the United Nations and other global bodies, considering, Donald Trump is being withdrawing from various global bodies and other countries might follow suit as well?
I'm fairly pessimistic. I'll tell you for free that I'm fairly pessimistic about the situation in Rwanda or any other part of the continent that is experiencing instability. You see, across the West, we now have the extreme right regimes taking power. From whether you're talking about America, you're talking about Germany, you're talking about many other areas in the West, the extreme right that are actually looking inward to try and rebuild themselves have taken power. So that's why I'm not very, very hopeful about getting some support from that end. And if you see the way President Trump is withdrawing support and aid from different countries of Africa, the situation is already worsening, not just on the area of political stability, but in many other social development areas like health and education, where US aid was the greatest supporter. So we are seeing a fairly hopeless situation. But we also remain on the other side, have some level of optimism that someday in the future something will be done just to save the vulnerable groups, the women, the children, the old, who are really suffering, particularly in the eastern parts of Congo.
All right, we'll leave it there. Dr. Kenneth Ombongi, thank you very much for speaking with us on Global Mirror and helping us understand the history of this entire Congo crisis and, of course, how you see the future of this entire conflict. Thank you very much for joining us. With that, ladies and gentlemen, it's a wrap on this broadcast. News and updates will continue. Thank you very much for joining us at the moment. Bye-bye. Good night.